again, and welcome to QBA Clips. Today's session, we're going to talk about the pivot table. And the pivot table is a really powerful tool that's built into Excel. It's really one of the most powerful tools that we have just at our ready disposal for analyzing data, for making sense of large quantities of data in tabular form that we might have in a spreadsheet. And the textbook talks about using it to slice and dice data. And this helps me really kind of understand and convey just what this tool lets you do. In essence, it lets you take a large data set and break up that large data set into smaller clusters, depending on different values of a certain variable. Or you could even break it up into smaller clusters based on values of more than one variable. And we'll see some examples of this. What I want to do is actually spend time here reviewing an example, a problem that we actually work in class. And we will take a look here at problem 273 from our text. And this is really a pretty powerful example that really covers quite a bit of a variety of things that you can do in pivot tables. So just working through the three portions of this example that comes out of our textbook, Data Analysis and Decision Making by Albright, Winston, and Zappi. It really gives us a good chance to see, get a flavor for what can be done. But I urge you to realize that there is a tremendous amount of additional things that you can do in pivot tables that this example does not show. So it's just to give you a flavor and get a sense for how things can be done using pivot tables. So let's dive right in. And again, if you're viewing this, you either could just use it as an example. If it's a problem that we've already worked in class, that you've seen, it's a good review or a good preview, perhaps, of things that may come up. So this is problem 273 out of this text. And in the data set, you're given a volume of data on expense reports filed by 7 sales representatives from a company over a 4-month period of time. And you're asked to do 3 things based on this set of data. One is you want to tabulate the number of expense records by category and by rep, sales rep, over that period of time. There are 3 possible categories, as you'll see. Secondly, we're asked to tabulate and plot as a time series the amount of money spent by each rep each month. And thirdly, to create a histogram of reimbursed amounts for 2 of the 3 categories. Now, you don't have to do any of these using pivot tables. You could do these in a variety of ways. But what I want to quickly show you here is just how easily you can do all of these using the pivot table function. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. This is just a quick primer, a quick review. But at least as you view this, you can go back and play around yourself with the data set or with any data set and get a feel for how you might do some of these things as well. I'm going to go ahead and open up the data file. And as you can see, let's see, I'll even enlarge this a bit. As you'll see, there are 5 variables in this data set. The name of the sales rep, the month, and I guess it's 4 months. I think it's May through June of a certain year. The 3 categories of sales of expense report filed: miscellaneous expenses, trip expenses, and entertainment expenses. The amount that was claimed, which we'll assume to be the amount that was spent by the sales rep, and then the amount that they were reimbursed, actually. So they did some sales event, if you will, whether it was taking a client out or something like that. They spent a certain amount of money, and they filed that claim with their accounting office, let's say. And based on the accounting rules of the office, they were reimbursed a certain amount, up to the amount that they claimed. Okay, and let's say we want to try to do some things here. The first thing we want to do is to try to create a table that breaks down for us and counts how many reports were filed by each rep in each category. And let me work over here on the side really quickly. And in essence, what we're trying to do is create a table that looks a little bit like this. And I'm just going to start to type this in here We're not going to do it this way, but just so you can see where we're trying to go. Okay, we want to create some kind of a table where we can capture and count the actual number of actual expense reports that were filed, let's say, by Adams in the miscellaneous category. How many expense reports were filed by Adams in the entertainment category? How many were filed in the trip category? These are the things that we want to try to find out. And we can do this in a variety of ways. Like I said, we could sort the data, we could count, we could use filtering and then count. But the pivot tables allow us to do it in a very automated fashion. So this is where we're going. And what I'm going to do, I'll leave this up here for now just so we can see it. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and actually execute this inside the pivot table. And our goal would be to try to end up with something that looks like this. Of course, we have 7 representatives here, Renal, Jones, Smith, etc. Okay. So the way this works, we're best off starting off clicked in one cell in the spreadsheet within the data set. And again, we're not using stat tools here. We're just going to go to Insert, and on the left-hand side, we have Pivot Table. Now, as I look through the things that they're asking me to do across all 3 parts of this problem, I know I need some charts. So if I click on the little down arrow, I get to select, do I just want a pivot table, or do I want a pivot table and a chart? And if I just click Pivot Chart, I get the chart and the table. So I'm going to click this and you'll see what opens up. We get a dialog box that asks us, it makes a guess on the range of data that we're interested in. And if we've just clicked on one cell within our continuous data field, as we talk about in class, this guess will generally be accurate. We can take a quick look and you see the scrolling box around our data set. And yes, this is a range that we want to gather. And then where do we want the pivot table to be placed? Well, we have a variety of options. I'm just going to place it in a new worksheet in the same file, same Excel file. So in reality, I'm just going to click OK. And what Excel does for us is it opens up a new tab that has a field, a blank field with a chart where our chart is going to go, a blank field where our table is going to go, and then we have a pivot table field list over here on the right hand side. This is kind of our control panel for the pivot table, and we notice we have a few things that are available to us up in the additional ribbons for the pivot table. And these, we won't use these just yet. Some of these are a little more advanced, different ways of getting to things. What I'll do here, I'm not actually going to use either of these, but you'll remember the table that we wanted to create. I'm going to jump back to it here. We want to create a table that has columns that are labeled by the category of the expense report, rows that are labeled by the name of the sales rep, and that's going to guide us to what we want to do. So over in my field list, I have my variables listed, and down below you'll see this these areas of the pivot table that give us my column labels, my row labels, and then something called values. And this is really the columns and rows are the variables by which I want to break up my data set. And I have 2 options here. So I can break things up both ways. In this case, we're going to break things up by sales rep and by the category of the expense. And then in the values field, it's the thing that I want to do the math on, if you will. Or once I've created those clusters, those subgroupings of my data set, and we'll see how that works. Okay, so if I want to create the table similar to the one we created, our example here, what I really want to pull down into my row area are the names. That's the variable that contains the names of the sales reps. And once I pull that down into this box in the control panel, if you will, into the field list, you notice over here on the pivot table, it actually populates those rows, Adams, Brown, Craig, etc. Now I want to get category, and I'm going to drag that down to my column labels. And here I have, let me just move the chart out of the way. Here, as you can see, we've got the columns all set up, entertainment, miscellaneous, trip. And then I have grand totals across the rows and totals down the columns. So I've set up my table. Now all I need to do is populate the thing that I want to do. And then what I've been asked to do is count how many records, if you will, how many observations occurred in my data set for which Adams was the name and entertainment, for example, was the category, for which Smith was the name and miscellaneous was the category. So I want to count the number of records that met that particular pair of criteria. And there are a handful of ways that I can actually do this. Since I know that I just want to count, what I really want to do is say how many records existed that met that criteria. So actually, every one of these variables, assuming I have no missing data, any one of these variables can be counted. I'm just going to count the numbers that show up that meet the pairs of criteria that I'm interested in. I'll give you an example to see how it looks. I could take, again, any one of these variables. I could take name, again. I'll use another one that I haven't used before. I'll take month. I'm going to drag that into my values field area. And you'll notice immediately that my table is now populated with some information. But what is it populated with? If you look up in the top left-hand corner, it says count of month. And all it's done is counted the number of observations in the variable month, which met each of the pairs of criteria defined by the rows and columns. And I have a total of 116, my grand total across my rows and columns, and that matches up with the number of expense reports I had filed over the entire 4-month period. And if you were to check these numbers, you would determine that they did indeed match up with the number of records filed by each rep in each category. Let me just show you one additional thing, because we selected month, and as I was trying to tell you, we could have selected any one of these variables, including one we had used before, name or category. I'm going to demonstrate that just by pulling count of month back out of the values field up into the top area, and it disappears. I'm going to pull something else down. I'm going to pull down claimed, and I want to show you a slight difference here. I pull claim down, it populates the numbers, but they look way different, and it's because what I'm doing is not counting the number of observations, but because claimed is a numeric variable, by default, pivot table assumes it's got to start somewhere. It assumes maybe what you want to do is add up all those numeric values that met the, each pair of criteria. So this number in here, 1780, is actually the total dollar value of all the claims filed by Brown in the entertainment category. That's interesting. We might want to know that, but we don't want to know that for this particular problem. What we really want is the count of claimed, not the sum of claimed. Now, when we had pulled down the variable month earlier on, it defaulted to count because month, name, category, all of those are categoric variables. And Excel could immediately tell there's no math I can do on this, so the only thing I could really do is count. So it defaulted to count. Turns out that was what we wanted. Claimed here, though, it defaults to sum, and I have to change it. I can still use the claimed variable, but I have to change it. And there are a couple of ways to go about doing that. One is I can right-click right on this cell that says sum of claimed. And I get a menu that opens up, and somewhere down there is value field settings. And there are a few different ways to get to value field settings, but this is one of them. And if you click on value field settings, it tells you that variable is claimed, it's doing the sum of the claimed, and it gives you, it says, how do you want to summarize this value field? How do we want to summarize claimed? And as you can see, it defaulted to sum. But we've got all these other options here. This is all math, if you will, that we can do on the values that are in that numeric variable. In our case, all we want to do is count them. So I'm going to click on count. I can even do things with the format of a number. There's so much richness in here. But for now, I'll just hit OK, and you notice it changes the numbers back to the count. And it's the identical numbers that we had when we used month. And again, this is only because in our data set, there's no blank fields. You've got to be careful of that. If I had a missing number here in month, when it tried to count month, it would come up one short. So you do have to make sure when you're doing this that you don't have blank cells, or that you're picking a variable that doesn't have any blank cells if you're going to count. All right, a few other things I want to point out while we remain on this example. One of them is the chart. You notice we didn't tell it to do anything with the chart, but once we put data in the pivot table, it automatically created this chart. It defaulted to what's called a side-by-side column chart, and you can see that here. You've got all kinds of panes that pop up that let you swap things around here once you select the chart. But as you can see, you've got, let's see if I can, there we go, just detach that. All right, you've got the rows, the row labels become your axis labels. And you notice actually in the control panel, I'm calling it the control panel, it's called the field list. These labels change. Remember, this was called row. When I click on the table, this was called row and column. When I click on the chart, it changes to being called axis and legend. And that happens when, in addition to that, you see this chart filter pane show up. I'm not going to use this for right now, but you can play around with it quite a bit. So clearly these two, the chart and the table, are linked very closely. So what we have is the row labels become the horizontal axis, if you will, of my chart, and the column labels become the legend. Now, just to quickly show you a couple of things that we can do. We could swap this around. Suppose this isn't the way I wanted the chart to look. I actually wanted 7 different columns. I wanted the legend, if you will, to be the rep names. I can go over here to the control panel, the field list, and simply swap these two in a live fashion. I can just drag name over to category. Now things look really squirrely for a while, but I can drag category back down to the axis, and I've just done you could almost call it a hot swap, if you will, a live switch of the legend and axis fields, and you notice they're changed. I can do the same thing if I'm in the row and column view on my by clicking on my pivot table. So you can decide which way you want things to look. You can play around with them. You can modify the chart, as we'll see in the next example. So a lot of things going on here that we can do. So one of them is the chart. The other is that we can, in real time, swap the rows and columns. Okay, I'm going to depopulate this, and we're going to start over. We're going to talk about part B. And part B of this problem, let's see if I can get back to it, asks us to tabulate and plot as a time series the amount spent by each rep during each month. Now, what we do in the pivot table is going to be based on what the problem asks us to do. There's no formula, do X then Y then Z. It depends on what you're trying to do. It's just a tool to help you tell the story in tables and charts based on the data set that you have and the questions that you want to ask. So here I want to tabulate the amount spent by each rep during each month. So clearly I want to break things up by rep and by month and tabulate those. Now I want the total amount spent, which we're going to assume to be what they claimed. And we're told to generate the plot to look like a time series. And there's some conventions about the time series plots that we'll use here to help us. Okay, I know I want to break things up by name. So I just drag that down to one of my two areas, legend or axis, because I was clicked on the chart. And the other thing was month, okay? And this works out pretty well. I took a good guess here. I could have done these the other way, but you notice that you just immediately start to look at the chart that the months are down in the x-axis. And if you recall, for time series plots, our time variable, in this case the months, needs to be on the x-axis. If we had done this the other way, we could, simply swap name and month, as you see. Okay. The next thing I want to point out here is that the table is all set up, and we can go ahead and pull down the variable that we want to do some math on. And you remember we said the thing we want to look at is the actual dollar amount that was spent. And we assume that's going to be the amount they claimed. So I'm going to take claimed, drag it to my values area, and you remember it defaults to the sum of claimed. And that turns out to be exactly what I want. The total amount that was spent and claimed by each rep in each month. So right now we have things tabulated. And these are simply numerical values in a Excel table. So we can format them any way we like. We can make them look like dollars. And if I just expand these rows here, you'll see that we've done that. So we can pull this into a PowerPoint chart or anything of that sort. So the formatting is just formatting like in regular cells. I'm going to go ahead and change these back to numbers just for convenience. The chart, though, is a little bit troubling because this doesn't look like a time series chart. I do have months on my x-axis, but the chart doesn't look anything like it's supposed to. It should be a line chart, and I want to have a chart for each sales rep. So the only thing I need to change here is the type of chart that I have. I have a side-by-side column chart, but I really want something different. And if you go to the pivot chart tools under design, at the very left-hand side, you get to change the chart type. And again, this is just a chart in Excel, so you could access that from a number of different places. What I want to do is a line chart, multiple line chart with markers. And I'm going to click on this chart type here, select OK, and here we have exactly the chart that we're interested in. I've got 7 different time series charts, individual points connected by lines with my value, the amount claimed, on the y-axis, on the vertical axis, and months along the time variable along the x-axis. So I've got individual time series charts. Now, here's another point where I can show you something that's quite powerful about the pivot table. Suppose we have all 7 sales reps here, and supposing we do not need all 7 sales reps. Supposing there are 2 product lines, and I use this example in class. Suppose there are 2 product lines in this company, and I'm the product manager for one of them. And it turns out that some of the sales reps represent my product, and I'm particularly interested in what those guys have been doing. So I want to only look at Brown, Craig, Jones, and Thompson. The other guys are interested, they're nice guys, but I don't need them on my chart. I can actually remove individual values from my columns or rows by using this pull down arrows. So I have my names in my columns, I can use the pull down arrow, and I can just deselect the folks that I don't want. I'm only interested in Brown, Craig, Jones, and Thompson. And when I click OK, it removes them from the table. The ones I have unchecked are removed from the table and from the chart. And suppose I don't really want the month of March because that's actually in the first quarter. I just want to capture the second quarter. Simply deselect that as well. And now I've done the same thing, but I've condensed it just for the particular values of the variables that I'm interested in. And this is extremely powerful in pivot tables. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put those all back in. I'll just select all, because if we keep messing around with things, we'll notice that if I make a change like that and I go on to do something else, it retains that change that I've made. So I want to be careful with that. So we've done part 2 here. Let's take a look at what part 3 is asking of us, and I'll simply remove the, take all the variables, pull them out of the field areas in the control panel. And let's go backwards and look at part C of this problem. Here we're asked to create a histogram of reimbursed amounts for 2 of the 3 categories. Particularly, we're interested in miscellaneous and entertainment. We're going to ignore the trips for now. And this one's interesting. We need to create a histogram. Now, we could return to our original data set and take a look at this reimbursed variable, and we want to create a histogram of this. Now, we've seen how to do this in stat tools. We could create a frequency table and so on. The challenge is that we need to make sure we exclude the trip category. So we could sort the data first. That's one way we could do it. Maybe separate the trip expense reports from all the others, and then do a histogram. We can do that not without too much difficulty, but I want to show you that we can also use the power of the pivot table to do this exact same thing for us. And we just need to know what it is we are trying to do when we generate a histogram. One thing we know is that we only want 2 of the 3 categories, so somehow I've got to break down my data set by category. So I'm going to pull category into the column area. Then I know that in the histogram, my horizontal axis are going to be bins that cover the range of my values of my variable I'm interested in, which in this case is the amount reimbursed. So I'm going to take reimbursed and I'm going to pull it down to the row area. Now you notice as my table gets set up here, I've got each value that occurred of a reimbursement is indicated here. So I've got everything from $2 all the way up to $996, some expensive trip someone took. So those are all shown up here. Now I haven't created the bins yet for my histogram. This is just all the possible values that occurred, not all the possible values, all the values that occurred in my data set of the variable reimbursed. Let's do a few things before we start to populate. One of them is that I know I only need the miscellaneous and trip category. Sorry, miscellaneous and entertainment categories. I'm going to deselect trip. Okay, and let's see what happens. As we scroll down, we notice that, hey, a lot of the really expensive things were trips. A lot of the high value expense reports were for trips, because when I eliminate the others, my values only go up to $239 for a minimum of 2. That's a good start. Okay, the 2 more things we need to do. First of all, the y-axis on my histogram needs to be the counts. It needs to be how many occurrences were there in the data set that met the criteria, that had a certain value for reimbursed and was in 1 or 2 of these categories. And we can remember, we're counting, so if I have no gaps in my data, no missing data, I can pull any of these variables in. But intuitively, to me, I'm counting the number of occurrences of the variable reimbursed. I'm just going to take reimbursed and pull it in here. Remember, it defaults to sum. Of course, we start seeing some things populated on our chart. But remember, we don't want to sum here. We want to count. So once again, I'm going to right-click on that upper left-hand cell, go to Value Field Settings, and I'm going to change it from sum to count. All right. And now these are telling me that there were 2 expense reports that were filed with a value of $2. They both happen to be miscellaneous. There were 2 expense reports filed with a value of $8. One was an entertainment expense, one was a miscellaneous expense, and so on. All right, a couple things left to do. We have to create these bins. We want to cover this whole range with mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive bins. I know my smallest value is 2, my highest is 239. Well, I can think about what are a reasonable amount of bins. I think we discussed in class that somewhere between 5 and 15 or 8 and 15 bins is good. And here's how we can do this in pivot tables. A pivot table lets us group values within a variable. And I'm going to go just right-click anywhere in this column of under row labels, this column of reimbursed values. And one of the options I get to pick in this menu is to group these values. And it asks me, where do I want to start? Where do I want to end? Now it guesses values from the whole data set. The smallest value was 2, the largest was almost 1,000, as we saw. But we don't want that whole range. We just want to go up to 239 just to cover that range. And we can start from 0 and we can go up to 250, let's say. And I'm going to step in units of 25. So my first bin will be 0 to 25, 25 to 50, and I should end up with 10 bins in all. And when I hit OK, we see that's exactly what we got. So this is one of the keys to doing something like histograms or frequency tables in pivot tables. What I've generated here is a frequency table. And the last thing to do is to get this chart to look a little bit like a histogram. And the way I can do that again is simply to change the chart type. So again, I go into Pivot Tool, Pivot Chart Tool. Once I've clicked on, you notice the ribbon changes depending on what I've clicked on. Okay, so when I click on the chart, I get the Pivot Chart Tools, and under Design, on the left-hand side, I get to change my chart type. And here now, I want to get back to a column chart, and I'm going to choose the stacked column chart here, not the side-by-side as we saw before. And when I click OK, I've got something that looks a lot more like a histogram, not exactly like a histogram. And it's color-coded, right? I have the different colored areas of those bars are either the miscellaneous reports or the entertainment reports. The last thing I'll do to make this look less like a column chart and more like a true histogram is to close up these gaps. Remember, there are just some specific conventions about the histogram. And I can just click on one of these columns, go to Format Data Series, and one of my options under Series Options is to change the width of the gap from a very large gap, which would make the width very small, to 0 gap. And that's what I want. And I'm going to click OK, click Close in this case. And now I have something that looks like a histogram, but it has the additional benefit of being color-coded. StatTools histograms wouldn't do that for you. So I've got a color-coded histogram that shows me what portion of each bar is miscellaneous versus entertainment. All right, that covers a broad range of things that you can do with the pivot tables and pivot charts, but nowhere near an exhaustive set of applications. We'll see a few different things in class that you can do with them, but the best bet is to really jump in and just just go to 10. Just play around with different data sets, doing different things, and just look at how much you can learn. The key is that we want to be able to take our data set, break it up by one or more, up to actually 3 different variables, and I've only shown you a few here. I'm only showing you up to 2 here. But we're going to take our data set, break it up along one or more variables, and then do something with each of those clusters. Do some math, either count or sum things up, and as you saw on that list, we can take averages and a whole lot more. All right, well, that's going to be it for now. That's our little primer on pivot tables, and I hope you found this useful, just a refresher perhaps of something we went over in class, but a great tool that you can keep going back and doing this over and over on some different data sets for you. Okay, that's all from QBA Clips for now.